Okay, so again, the beginning part, you don't need to do this, but I do want to talk about it. So if I zoom in here on this file, you'll notice in SolidWorks here, this is turned orange. It's just the face. It's just, all of this is to mention that when you go into keyshot, you bring a file into keyshot, you'll see when this imports, this orange face will import as its own body in the feature tree in keyshot. And the solid body will be different. So this could be useful if, for example, you want to, I don't recommend this. It's not best practice, but it works in a pinch. Like let's say for some reason you want your concept for this, this edge to be chrome, and you're kind of in a pinch, you can just simply select these by clicking on them and holding Shift, right click and look for this beach ball with a pencil. Bring this down, and here you want to select face, and you want to change the face. You can change the face to a different color. So this could be a way, for example, now you could apply a different material to this. The reason why I don't, it's kind of a workaround. The reason I don't recommend it is because now I would expect to see a part line here, and there is no part line. So honestly, I would take off points for that because it's just like a flush meeting. There's no like fillet or something like that. Now, it could be useful, for example, when I did this file previously, if I change the color of this body now, I fixed it. So if I, again, right click on this face, beach ball, now if I change the color of the body to something like green, before, when this file was first built, this interior was attached to this. So when the outside became green, the inside became green, and that was like weird for a toaster, right? You would expect the inside to be metallic. So I separated that. So where this like selecting faces becomes handy is if you needed to, for example, select these faces. This would be a much more logical use of that technique because you already have a part line built in here, left to right, with this fillet here at least. There should probably be a fillet on this edge, but so just the main takeaway from preparing your file. Or here's another logical reason to have the indicator being a different color, because that could probably be painted or stamped or something. Having just the edge be painted or chrome, that's probably, again, I wouldn't recommend that. But just knowing that you can change faces and colors to come into keyshot as a different part is a workaround and a handy way to separate things as needed. Again, just only try and keep it to logical areas. If it would be an actual material break, better to build that into SolidWorks as a part line. So that said, when there's a separate body, like this panel here on the side, this will come into keyshot as a separate body. And it will import as is. Side note, if you want, for example, if you want to be able to render the door open and closed, it's not a requirement, but some people like to do it. It looks pretty awesome. The way to do that, and again, the way that keyshot works, is if you go to this door open and unsuppress this, this will give you an either or. If you edit this command and change this to say copy, so now you have both a closed door and an open door, this is the best way to bring this into keyshot, because then you can simply hide the body. You don't have to worry about rotating it or moving it. So that's the best workflow. If you need to show an object in two orientations in keyshot, better to bring it in with both those bodies than trying to rotate them in keyshot after the fact. That's my recommendation, at least. Now, of course, being the assembly here, if you do that, you would probably, again, it would be best practice to put this handle in as well. I don't know why this is frozen on me. So again, to make that change, you simply edit this feature and check this copy box, and then you'll have both doors if you need them. Cool. Once you have that, you just simply save your file, and you can move into keyshot at that point. So I'm just going to go ahead and close out SolidWorks. The assembly wasn't happy with me. Okay. So the goal with this PDF, again, is just to kind of introduce you to Keyshot and give you a full, like, talk about my workflow or like a suggested workflow of how to approach the program. Keyshot's a pretty straightforward program. I think they did a good job of making it relatively user-friendly. So first off, from this document, you know, what we're just looking at off the bat is your workspace. And here it just kind of tells you what you're seeing, okay? Let me see here if there's like a view, like a reset. I mean, I believe what I have shown here, does this look wildly different than what you all see in your program? Okay. I mean, if it does look different, there are some things like down here, I believe this brings up the different windows. So if you don't have this on the left, it's the library. This on the right is the project. Render is kind of its own pop-up. But if we look at the sheet here, it kind of explains what you're seeing. So this window in the middle, it's real-time viewing. It's where you'll see your file. The library panel, if you don't see it, you can turn it on with the M key. Think of it like a restaurant menu. This is showing what all your options are, what you can choose, and to what you can apply. The project panel, this is what remembers what your selections are. So again, if I'm using a restaurant menu analogy here, the project panel is a list of what you've ordered, okay? So in the library panel, exactly, you'll have like materials, colors, environments, background images, textures. In the project panel, you'll have like a list of the bodies that you have in there, a way to change your scenes and organize them from what you have set up, a way to customize your materials, cameras, and so on and so forth. Down here, navigation hotkeys. Oh, sorry. This is how you work around in Keyshot. So that's what this is about. So left mouse and hold is tumble, and I'll show this in a minute. I guess you can all read this. Scroll wheel is zoom in and out. Middle mouse wheel and hold is pan. So it's similar to SolidWorks, but a little bit different. This at the bottom is a toolbar key. It's turned on with, I believe, T, as in toolbar. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to import the file. So it's this little icon down here. I believe you can also go to File Import. And if you downloaded that file, you can either import the assembly directly, or you can import the Parasolid. Now, the reason I created a Parasolid is occasionally there will be like bugs or errors or issues when you're importing from SolidWorks. I feel like they've ironed most of that out. It's kind of a fail-safe, but like if you ever get an error when you're trying to import a SolidWorks file and it says like no 3D geometry found or something like that, the workaround is to just save it out as a Parasolid or as a step file, and that should solve your problem. That tends to be more common if you don't have like the latest version of Keyshot. That problem may happen. If we look at the settings here, location is just kind of where it goes. Typically snap to ground is a good one to have. Up orientation is typically set to Y. If you're coming in from Rhino, I think it's Z. Again, this is all on the sheet. It's pretty self-explanatory. I pretty much leave this as is. Tessellation quality suggested is 0.4. Import NURBS data. It increases the file size. Yeah, but I guess can lead to smoother curves. I don't think it's as necessary, but these settings is what has been suggested to me, so it's what I've been using, and it's what's on that sheet. So I'm simply just going to click import. I've already navigated to the assembly first. Now this can take a little bit sometimes depending on the size of your file and the complexity of it. So here you can see it came in with this door open. So I was talking about those navigation tools before here, left mouse, hold, tumble. So here if I left click, it spins it around. If I hold down the middle mouse wheel, it pans. If I roll the mouse wheel in and out, it zooms in and out. Are there any questions so far? All right, so moving on, we have it imported. So the first thing you're going to want to do, again, this is like loose, rough, suggested workflow. The first thing you're going to want to do is organize your scene tree if you need to. It may not always be necessary. Obviously, I just opened this door, so that's going to be different for all of you. You won't have this open door. That's something that So, okay, here on the right, this is my scene tree. This is what's showing me what models I have. If I click on this plus, it expands all of these. So for example, you can see it even carries the name from SolidWorks since it's an assembly. So these 4 feet here, you can see it's named P2 feet. If I click on these eyeballs, it hides them. If you need to organize things, you could, for example, like I could take these feet and drag them and drop them on this other foot. It's going to say, hey, you're reorganizing things. Do you want to do that? And I'll say yes. And now I have a master eyeball that turns all the feet on and off. You can change names down here. It's not necessary, but this is not necessary. I'm just showing you simply how you might organize a file if you need to. In this instance, with this door open, you'll notice like there's a lot of bodies in here. If it's hard to find something, simply by clicking on it in your viewing window. So if I click on this open door, if you watch what happens here, it will expand and it should highlight it for me. It didn't happen the first time I clicked on it again. So here's my open door. I might want to get rid of this or drag this up. So you can see I can just simply drag this. If it makes a rectangle, it's going to group it. If it makes a dotted line, it's just going to slot it somewhere. So maybe I just drop it above my toaster. And now I have my open door up here. So now when I turn this on and off, it'll be separate. The other thing I want to show you is now that I made this green, oh, I guess this is the whole body. Let me show you this knob. Like I mentioned, it would come in the color that we had. So here we have the indicator in orange. You can see I can turn that off. Here's the one difference though, because it was just a face. If I turn that off, this is now a hollow surfaced body. It's just like a thin piece of paper. There's nothing inside of here. So that's the only difference when you use this method of changing the color of faces to get separate bodies. But you can see how it separated that out with that color. Okay, so organization-wise, that's the only thing I would do is maybe just move that door up. Once you have your tree organized, next thing you would want to do is apply materials. So this is what's in the library panel on the left here. You have a different amount of materials to choose from. Chances are there's some that are used more often than others. So a very common one for me personally, under plastic. Obviously lots of options here. It's tempting, I think a lot of students like to use soft. My issue with soft is, I'm getting ahead of myself, is sometimes it gives this kind of like, I think it takes slightly longer to render and it gives us this kind of like grainy quality. I think better is to just use these hard materials, and if you want something to appear soft, use the rough setting, not the shiny setting. It's to each their own and it's up to you. If you're ever just applying a generic color, my advice to you is to select plastic, hard setting, and then rough setting, and start here. So to apply material, it's simply just looking at these little like spheres, cut spheres at the bottom here, and just simply dragging them onto your file. So if I want to have a blue toaster, I simply click on this blue, drag it over, and let go, and you can see that it copies here. And I can keep doing this. I can drag this over onto the side panel and let go. What this is asking is saying, hey, we noticed that you just applied this same material to a different body. Do you want them to be linked? It depends on your situation. In this case, if you want your toaster to match the side caps and the center, you would say yes. Now that they're linked, you'll notice if I drag a different color over to one of these, it changes all of them. If I right click on this and I say unlink, or sorry, it's right click on this, I believe it's under edit. Nope. It's here somewhere. Unlink material. So again, I select this, I'm right clicking in the center of my toaster, I say unlink material. Now if I drag a different color onto here, because I unlinked the red center portion, it will not update with this other one. They're now separated. But again, if I drag this here, it will ask me once again if I want to link it, and I'll just go ahead and say yes. So that's how materials are applied. This is the material that I recommend for most colors. If you double click on this, any material, you will bring up the material properties on the right side here. There's a couple takeaways here to look for. One is this roughness. If you slide this down, you will make the toaster look more glossy. So if I zoom in here, if you look at this like little corner here with my current scene setting, you see some white reflections. If I drag the roughness up, those disappear. They become a little bit more fuzzy. So this roughness, that's basically matte versus gloss. The other thing you want to be aware of course, there's not many color options here. If you double click on this diffuse panel, you have full color choice to your heart's content of whatever kind of toaster you might want and full settings. So that's the other one to be aware of. For what it's worth, specular, this is what the highlight color will be. So if I double click this, I believe it defaults to white. It used to default to a lighter color of, so like if you had a blue, I think it used to default to a light blue. I don't know, I could be making that up. My advice is to just leave it white. Sometimes it's more clear depending on your lighting. If you change this to some weird color, your highlights will appear in that color. So I would avoid that. If you want to copy materials, so now I have this custom material here. I don't want to drag and drop it. Let's say I want this on the feet of the microwave too. You can do that by holding Shift and left clicking on a material, and that copies it. And then Shift and right click on a different body, and that pastes that material on there. So again, I Shift and left clicked on this side panel, and then I right click on this foot, and it applies that exact same material to the foot. Holding on Shift, I can just keep going and right clicking. I can just apply this material to everything if I so chose. By doing that, again, everything, I believe it automatically gets linked. So now if I drag this material here, everything is going to become this neon green. If I change just the handle to some weird different color, everything updates. So everything's linked. And again, if you want to change that, you simply would do that by right-clicking on this and saying unlink material, right-click on this saying unlink, and saying unlink. So if you have trouble importing your file from SolidWorks, the workaround is to just save it as a parasolid. That's my advice. Were you able to import the .xt from Box? Okay. Now, yeah, like I mentioned, I know it's repetitive now, but just for the recording, if you go to Help and About, I believe this is the latest version of 8.2.8. So if you have that, you're up to date. If you don't have that or something seems weird, you can always go to Help and check for updates. If for some reason you can't import SolidWorks or a Parasolid, just try saving out different file types. Try Step would be the next one I would probably try. If you still can't, then I would say there's at that stage, likely it's something wrong with keyshot. You may need to reinstall it. Any questions on anything else? So for those of you following along, if you just want to take, it doesn't have to be critical. I think I just unlinked my handle from my main toaster here. So let's see if I change this color, what happens. So yeah, materials make it pretty easy to play with. I don't think these are linked yet, so I can, again, if you want to link them, Shift, left click to copy, right click to paste. And again, maybe, I want to unlink these materials from the feet. So that way now I can drag this here. Oops. All right. Now, of course, that's just plastic, right? And and there are the settings. So if you want to continue applying things, other materials, of course, there's metal in here. Maybe you want chrome handle. There's two options, rough and polished, right? Metallic touch points on your toaster. For the door, I would recommend under glass, you want solid glass. That's an easy mistake to make and one I make all the time. Because this is rendered as a solid thick piece of glass, you want it to calculate that way. So here's a glass solid white. Simply you can drag this over. And depending on we'll see this later with the scene setting, depending on the lighting, it might make the inside look a little bit different. Now, obviously, this is all we see on the outside of the toaster. For an accurate rendering, you want to be able to see the inside too. So for example, if you want to hide the door, you simply just click on it, find the eyeball here under scene. So I went from material to scene, and I click on this to hide this, and now we can see the inside. So for example, if it's a toaster, inside should probably be metallic. I would probably select under aluminum, either something like rough aluminum would be good for this inside. For the grate here, I would probably pick some polished chrome. I mean, it's all up to you. Doesn't matter. Maybe around the heating elements too, polished chrome. Now it's asking if I want to link these materials. I'm assuming it's linking just the grate to this because I just applied it, so I'm going to click yes. Hopefully it's not linking this to the handle, but you can always adjust that later. So that is one of multiple ways to make materials or apply materials, is simply dragging from the library, and that's common. Another way to edit materials, so if we look at this heating element, this is exactly as it came in from SolidWorks, or the file you downloaded. If I double click on the heating element, it brings me to this material property dialog. It's no different than if I double click on the top here. You'll notice there's some settings when I have this blue material. But if I click on the heating element, there's a little bit less settings because nothing has really been applied yet. Right now it's just a simple diffuse material with this color. That's how it comes in. I could, for example, edit it to make it look like it's glowing. So I could drop down this diffuse, and you see there's a lot of options here. So this is a way you might set up a custom material. It's not as critical to know this because Keyshot has a really great library that gets you close, and that's often a better starting point. But there will be some times in this class where we will create a material using this drop-down menu. It's just, I think, enough to be aware that that exists and that you can do this. So in this example, if you double-click on your heating element and drop this down from diffuse, you'll see there's a lot of different options here. One option is down here, emissive under special. And this will make it look like it's glowing a little bit. It'll give off light, it'll pick up in reflections. If you now click on the color, you can change it to something depending on like how hot you want this to look. So like an orange glow, it can make it look like the material is on, okay? Or sorry, the burner is on in this toaster. Some slightly more advanced settings up here, the material graph. This allows you to stack materials. This is useful for doing like bubbles inside of something, or like confetti inside of glass or something. That's a little bit more advanced, and we get into that in project 3, or at least talk about it a little bit more. I'll be honest, I'm a little less familiar with this material graph, but this is really handy for doing very complex materials. Multi-material, this is useful for this project. Again, it's not a requirement, but let's say you have these burners and you want to have both an off setting and an on setting. So right now you can see if I click on multi-material, if you want it to go away, I think you just click on it again and it brings you back to this like familiar area. But if I click on so again, I'm selected on the burner, double clicked on it. If I click on multi-material, you'll notice that it says here, P2 heater color emissive. If you click on this icon, it will add a new material to it. And you'll notice it's gone gray, right? Here you can select this and have it be what you want it to be. So for example, again, the default is just plastic. You can change this again to something different, and you can change this color if you want. You can change it to orange to match the other one. But because it's not emissive, it will look like it's off. So this is just a way to toggle between two settings. Keyshot's a pretty deep program. It gives you ways to organize scenes. And you can, by going through this level of setup, it makes it a little bit easier if you want to like toggle an on and off setting. It's more advanced. It's definitely not required for this project. I just want to make you all aware that it's here and how you might use it. Are there any questions on that? For project 2, you can render the burners however you want. You can render them on, you can render them off. I don't care. Whatever you think looks best for you. In this case, I'm just going to leave these on. Okay, next up, if I double click again on this blue, I just want to talk through some of these things, textures and labels. Not a requirement for this project, and we get more into it later. Some people like to use these, especially if you have more familiarity with keyshot. Just for what it's worth, you want to think of labels like a sticker. So this would be good for putting a logo on here, or if you had some kind of like graphics for the knob to show you what the settings are, that's what you would use a label for. Textures are better at doing like, giving like, as described, texture to the object. And again, we get more into this. I have a whole demo on diffuse specular bump opacity down the road, I believe project 3. For those of you that are doing like wood grain or concrete, again, there's some good default materials in here, and we can look at that here for these options. So I believe there is a whole wood section, and simply just, pick from your menu what you want to try. You can just drag and drop and see what it looks like. You'll notice if I make this wooden toaster, if I double click on this, under textures, you'll see it automatically loads a diffuse map and a bump map. Again, I typically don't get into this until later, but if any of you need to use these textures, you can change the size here, size and mapping. I believe this means that the height and width are linked. Down here, this sync, it means that the diffuse map and the bump map are linked. Diffuse is basically like wrapping paper for like a Christmas present. Bump is giving the height depth. So for example, if the wood grain's too big, I believe you can drag this in one direction and it will change size. The problem is if you go too small, you will see the repetition in the pattern, which becomes problematic. The illusion doesn't work as well. Again, I believe Keyshot has a pretty good default. Whatever it recommends it come in as is pretty good. If you look at the bump map, I believe you can shift the aggressiveness of it. Here, bump height down here. But may not translate. So again, for those of you using wood. For those of you using concrete, I believe if you type in concrete up here, they have something called, if I hover over this, I believe it'll tell me, urban concrete. I don't know where it's located. I found it by just searching for it. Again, I think for this project, good enough. We'll get into custom materials and stuff later. If anyone is like super curious about that, maybe I can one-on-one with you on that. So anyway, the reason I bring up these textures is just because they came up in the design show and tell, but also to just show you like what this tab does. And that's basically it on materials. Some materials that some like personal preferences that I like, if you're ever going for something super, super glossy, I find that paint and shiny is the glossiest you can get. It's, I believe, more glossy than plastic, hard, shiny. I think a really Axalta Paint Hot Hues has a lot of interesting selections. The options in terms of editing them is a little bit more limited than other materials, but you can get some really interesting like metallic and like kind of appliance looking finishes from Axalta Paint up here. That's what I tend to use. So I tend to use plastic, hard, and rough. I just pick rough because then shiny, the difference between rough and shiny is just whether it loads the slider in the middle or whether it loads the slider all the way to glossy. I use that a lot. Metals, I typically use aluminum and chrome. Things like steel, stainless steel will have a bit of a green tint to it. I use Axalta Paint a lot. If I'm doing clear things, I'll use, again, Keyshot's gotten pretty good. So if it's glass, I'll use glass. If it's plastic, they have clear plastic here. Okay, I thought they had more. I would use either of these if I had to use it right now. I thought they used to say like polypropylene or HDPE or something. Here, Mold Tech, this is an interesting thing to use, but not as necessary if you just select this. are you all familiar with Pantone, the Pantone color system? Mold Tech is like the textured equivalent of Pantone. So if you're not familiar with Mold Tech, if you down the road, if you're designing a product, you at some point in your career you will likely be encountered with having to spec a texture on something, and you can have a Mold Tech book and flip through it and look at like dots, lines, different like bumps and stuff, and they all have names applied to it. So just like this here. So this is Mold Tech 11020 spray dot. So if you're ever rendering like a plastic object and you want it to have a bit of a texture to it and look real, you can use these. I believe you can change the color to this just like anything else. So this will give you a slightly more realistic plastic feel if you're going for that, would be Mold Tech, but again, not quite necessary in my opinion. The rest are kind of used as needed. I think their woods are pretty good and stuff. So yeah, just depends on what you're going for and what you need. I think for now, for this demo, I'm just gonna go to Axalta Paint here and just pick something crazy like this and have a purple toaster. To turn the door back on, now that I have this, I simply just go back to my scene tree here, find the eyeball, and turn this on. And I believe I left my burners on, so it's now glowing on the inside. It would help, yeah. So if you all recall the exercise from Monday, and going through and looking, I think a lot of people will look at the picture. So if you match the color, it will be a big indicator, I think. So that's my recommendation. It's not required, but I think that would be a good idea, to match the color of your toaster to the color of your show and tell. And some are very material specific, like those of you that pick the speaker and are going with wood and whites. Now, I will say for the render for project 2, it's typical, let me try. It's typical when you're presenting a lineup of products to show them all in the same color and to have a separate exploration for CMF, color and materials and finishing. The reasoning for that, so okay, for this project, you need 3 renders that are roughly set up like this, okay? Obviously, your handles, knobs, and feet will change. The toaster will be the same. Strong recommendation to all of you to definitely keep the toaster material the same. I would even encourage that you keep the handle, the knobs, and the feet the same from concept to concept. That would be the most realistic, what's the word, like simulation if you were presenting actually 3 concepts. The reason for that is, depending on who you're talking to, color and finish can sway somebody. So you want to compare apples to apples. So if you're trying to pick the best handle and you show 2 handles in black and 1 in red, you know, if the CEO of the company likes red, they may lean to the red handle. That may just, or it may be distracting. Like it would be hard for me to pick, because it would be hard for me to compare seeing 2 in black and 1 in red. It would look different. So I won't make that a hard requirement. I will make it a hard requirement that the toaster stay the same color. I will make it a soft requirement, a strong suggestion to keep the materials consistent between the families. That said, I know some of you have like material specific concepts or like color specific concepts, so that's why I'm making it soft. If you want to change, if grouping the families together with a color or material helps you, you can do that. Correct. What I mean is, yeah, to your heart's, yeah, that's a good clarification question. So let's say that your concept is you want to have slightly different color everything because that's your brand language you're trying to match. As far as I'm concerned, totally okay. What I mean is if this is the color setup that you go with, the color scheme you go with, in all 3 of your renderings, your feet should be black for each family. In all 3 of your renderings, your handles should be this blue teal color. Your top knob should always be red, the bottom knob should always be green. That's my advice. I mean, obviously not this exact color scheme, this is horrible. but the consistency is my advice for clarification. I would say more typical is you would probably have like something like this going on, where I would expect the knobs to match, handles and feet, probably not. I feel like I have a bit of a Joker theme going on here. So maybe a little bit better. The requirement is that you have 3 renders set up basically like I have this shown right now, and that's it. If you would like to add another render to show in context, if you want another render to like zoom in on the foot or something, you want to show highlights and detail, by all means, you're welcome to do that. Those extra efforts, especially like showing the feet, would be helpful, could be a helpful thing to like show as a call out. So maybe, again, I'm going to recommend that all of your hero shots are about a straightforward 3/4 like this. But you could, for example, have a rendering of the foot in this top corner here, if you wanted to help argue your case when we present this, so that your family is a little bit more clear. In context would be cool. It would just be a nice thing to add, but it's not a requirement. It's a good question. Okay, so one of the things I haven't mentioned yet, and again, I'll get into this. I've made a note about it. I want to get into it later in SOLIDWORKS to show you all. Depending on how you approach this project, you will either have one assembly with all the families in it, or you will have 3 assemblies. It's up to you how to approach it. So again, remember, you have 3 families. You have 3 handles, 3 knobs, 3 feet, 1 toaster. You can approach it by putting all 3 handles on the toaster, all 3 knobs on the toaster, all 3 feet on the toaster, of course, multiplied by the number of times that they're on there. And that would be 1 master assembly. If you bring that into keyshot, this is where it's useful at the start of this demo when I was dragging things around and labeling things. That's something you might want to do in keyshot to organize your scene tree. If that seems too fussy and complicated for you, you can simply create 1 assembly with 1 family, save it, save a copy of it, and then replace those components with the other ones, and you would have 3 assemblies. That's also acceptable. That way, when you bring them into keyshot, it will keep them all separate for you. I hope to save a little bit of time for that at the end. I made a note of it. If for some reason I forget, feel free to remind me. So yes, we will get into that. So picking up now with the demo, once you have materials set, like this hideous Joker toaster, the next thing you would do workflow-wise would be to go and look at your environment. So right now, this is what our default environment looks like. It's what always loads in keyshot. I believe, in fact, it's called startup. If you go here into your scene tree and click on or I guess that's not scene. What is it called? Project panel. And click on environment, you will see what environments you have here. Same thing here in the library. If you click on environments, it looks like a globe. It'll load these. So I will talk about some personal favorites of mine, but also how to set up something, you know, a little bit or more custom rather. My default that I used to use all the time is under light tent, I believe. It used to not be this organized. Nope, that's a lie. It's panels. Apologies. Under panels, I would tend to use one of these these 4 options here. Typically these 2. The reason that I use these is they give a lot of contrast and gloss and pop. It's just kind of an easy default setting. They also give you some nice like hard highlights across things. Again, it's all to your own preference. Now, obviously, it looks kind of silly with this kind of gray background. So again, this is my personal default. What I always used to do is under environment down here. I don't know why this doesn't make it more clear. Oh, that's why. I believe you will probably see it load this way under settings, environment settings. Here for background, lighting environment, I typically set it to color and just leave that at white. So that's my preferred setting. When it comes to your environment, if you hold down Control and drag with the mouse bar left to right, you can rotate the scene around your object. So you'll notice the lighting's changing. You'll also notice that the rotation number here is changing. So here's 261 degrees, holding Control and dragging, moves it around, okay? You know, if you're going for something typical, you know, remember back to, you know, DES 140, 123 lighting. You probably it's gonna be brightest on top, one face a little bit darker than the other. If you have these big fillets, it's nice to get highlights on them. You know, you can try and strategically place one of these big sharp lines. I just had one. There you go. There's one here. And just play with it until it looks right. Typically, you want your shadows cast back. If you're trying to go for something. There are more settings in here, such as like brightness, contrast, size. Essentially, what these environments are, it's kind of like painting an image on the inside of a sphere, and that's what's around your image here. That's what I used to use, and I think that's a good default if you just want to jump and run with something. More recently, I have been using under interior this Aversus bathroom. It can look a bit silly. It looks it's just good at giving really random highlights. I think it's also just the nature of the products I've been working on. It has worked well with. But one setting change that I make to this one is under, I believe, HDRI editor. If you click on this, down here you have saturation. Sometimes I'll just completely kill that saturation, just so I kind of get these like random highlights and stuff, but it doesn't look too distracting. That's kind of been something I've been using more frequently recently. So again, to each your own. Pick and choose what you want. Now the nice thing with this here. So again, it's one of these things that I was just doing without thinking. Let me think about this more carefully. If you double click, it loads the environment. So that's what I've been doing. Control Z, I believe, will undo that. If, for example, I want to toggle between two, I might go back to these panels. I might click on this and drag it over to my environment setting here, and you'll notice it loads it. And now I have a quick way to toggle between them. And this will remember your custom settings and what you need to do. Are there any questions on environments? Okay. Now, again, keyshot's pretty great. The defaults are good. If you take time to rotate them, you should get something close to looking good. It is incredibly valuable to know how to customize your environment and customize your lighting. And again, I think they did a good job of making it not too hard. So if you're following this, I guess more of an intro demo, I guess I get to this later. Okay, never mind. I will get to it. I'll stick to it in order. As we work across the top here, so again, workflow-wise, number one, set materials. Number two, set environment. Lighting, this is more fancy keyshot stuff. I tend to just leave it on basic. Sometimes products in jewelry can create a lot of reflections and look really fancy. Self shadows is important because without it, I believe the inside of this toaster is going to will look brighter. But it's basically you want the objects to cast shadows on other objects. These modes can change the number of ray bounces and stuff too. Again, the default, in my opinion, is good enough. Over here, next up, you might want to set is cameras. So again, using your navigation panel, set this up how you want. Again, I'm going to recommend that everyone take this kind of 3/4 hero shot for your toaster. Think about making sure that you can clearly see your handles and the knobs and the feet. The feet I'm less concerned about. It's mainly the handles and the knobs that we should be able to see. Again, this is how your renderings will be judged. So make sure your details are nice and visible. If you want to do a separate call-out render, you can, like render a big knob and put it off to the right side here, a big foot, and put it off to the side here, a big handle, so on and so forth. You're welcome to do that, but it is not a requirement. Once you have your view set up how you want it, you can click on this icon here, and that creates a new camera. There's a locking feature here that if you click on this, it will prevent you from accidentally rotating and losing the view you have. So this is setting up a camera is useful for, this is what the rendering I want. Now if I need to go make a change, I can click back on free camera, rotate it, change whatever I need to do. And now if I click on this camera, it will snap back to the rendering that the setup and view that I saved. So that's how you create new cameras, is by clicking this. Again, you can have multiple, right? Sometimes, you might want to unlock this, make a slight tweak to it, and then just click on this to create a new camera, and that will save it. So now you can jump between the two and kind of pick which one you think looks better. There are more settings down here, such as like Perspective focal length, field of view, you're welcome to play with that. Again, I think this is the default 50, that's great. Sometimes to make it more dramatic, people will punch it up to like, I wouldn't go smaller than 35, because if you look, it just gets super wonky. We don't want that. Sometimes you want to go the opposite. You want something that looks a little bit more orthographic, or simple. You can blow this up by sometimes like 60 or 70 is a default, but again, just leave it at 50 is my advice to you. Obviously, you want perspective turned on. Here you can these are settings that you can change with your mouse as you navigate, but sometimes you can tweak it just a little bit, with these settings here as you see fit. But again, if you always get lost, just snap back to your view you saved and you're good. Okay. Once you have, so that's the general workflow, and it's not a coincidence that Keyshot laid this out this way. Scene, so again, recap on workflow, import your stuff, organize your tree. 2, apply material. 3, set your environment. Lighting is really not a step because my advice is to just leave it as what it is. Camera, pick the view you want. Once you've gone through all of this, you may want to go back and revisit aspects, okay? Because obviously your environment is going to change what your materials look like, so on and so forth. So this would be the point in time where you would go back and kind of revisit and tweak things. And again, that's kind of my suggested workflow to you, is get everything close to where you want it, then go back and fine tune once you have your scene and stuff and your camera view selected. Because again, you can see here with the camera, if I start to move this around, it will change what my highlights are and what it looks like. So now that I have my camera selected, I may want to go back to my environment and holding down Control, rotate it so that I get my, maybe I want a giant white hotspot on top of my toaster or something. Are there any questions? Okay. Yeah, go for it. Yeah, that's a good question. If your object is light colored, you can have a dark background. That's fine. It's up to you, I would say. I mean, yeah, for an experiment, let's look at what this looks like. Let me pick a. If you have something super bright like this, here is once again you can go to settings and you can tweak this brightness down a bit. That's something you might want to consider doing. But yeah, for sure, you can take this background color and just, take like a dark gray if you want your toaster to pop. Sometimes it's a trendy thing, I'm sure, if you have like colored aspects of your product, you can match it with kind of like a pastel. So maybe if everything in here is kind of green, you might match that with a background color. So that's another kind of like thing I've seen. You can experiment with the color of the handle, the knobs, and the feet to your heart's content. I only have one requirement. The toasters stay the same color between all 3 renders. I also request that the render view, the camera, stay the same. Now, you are welcome to change, if this is the color scheme I'm going with, my advice would be to stick with green handles, green knobs, and green feet for all 3 concepts. That's not a requirement, but that's like a strong advice for making it feel like a real design approach, because that would be typical. Now, Bryce asked a similar question earlier. It does not mean that all the handles, knobs, and feet all need to match. I can unlink this material and I can make this handle orange and have it be different. But now that the handle's orange, all my handles should be orange. That's my advice. But again, some of you, depending on your product, like you may want to play with what's wood and what's concrete, or if it's soot sauce, I know there was a lot of primary colors used, and if you want to use that as part of your family and tying things together, I give you permission to change it from concept to concept when it comes to the handles, the knobs, and the feet. Does that answer your question? Cool. Okay. Yeah, so feel free to play with the background color as you see fit. My advice is, again, to not make it too distracting. But, okay, for the sake of this demo, or this next stage, it will be helpful for this to be a color and not be white. And I am going to change the background to back to white. Okay, so this is now, we're going to get into some custom lighting. This is all an exercise I want you to at least try today. Whatever you have set up, or if you've just been watching along once you have this set up. If you go to environments, go to basic and load the just totally black one. I mean, if you really want, you can pick one of these gradients, but I think this exercise is best done with this just pure black. And obviously here, if you have the burners turned on, you can see it is in fact giving off a glow. But obviously, you know, your toaster is purely black and we don't want that. The way to edit, this is just to start with like no lights. This is kind of like a dark room setting. If you go to HDRI editor, you can start to add pin lights. So make sure you scroll all the way to the top so you see these icons. And basically, the one I would recommend using is this pin here on the left. If you click on this, it will add a pin light on here. And you'll notice down here it says Control plus left mouse button to add highlight and left mouse button to drag position. So as long as you've loaded this pin, if you start to click on your objects, it will jump the light around, and wherever you click your mouse is where the highlight will be. So that's a very useful tool. Like if you're ever trying to set up a scene and you're like, man, I really just want there to be a nice reflection right across this face or have this be right here. That's the best way to do that. You can also do this with environments, which I'll show you in a minute. So the first thing that I would do is I would probably click on this corner here to just try and light it from this corner as your starting light. And now that you have this pin, you have these settings down here of like brightness and size and stuff. So the default size is 30. Maybe you want this to be a bit bigger, being the first light, maybe up to 50. You can punch the brightness up a little bit more. Not too bright because we're going to add more lights to this. Fall off is like feather. The more fall off you have, the more of like a soft transition from light to dark. The harder the fall off, the more kind of sharp edges you'll get. You can leave it at what you want. That's pretty much all that I mess with. And now you can just kind of continue that process. So you can click done once you have that position where you want. Now maybe you want to click on another pin, and maybe this one you want across the handle, or to kind of catch this front face a little bit. And maybe that's it. You're happy with that setting, but it's up to you. You can play with it. Again, maybe you want it a little bit brighter. If this is your two face, you want this to just be to really pop and show your toaster. Or maybe you want it more subtle. Again, I would recommend going with thinking about 1, 2, 3 lighting from, you know, your early Viz classes. I think you can do most lighting with 3 pins should be enough. Again, thinking about that 1, 2, 3 lighting. If for some reason, so I just loaded this pin, and you'll notice I'm clicking around, it doesn't appear to be jumping. If that's the case, to load it, you just click this target. Select whichever light you want. So in this case, pin 3, select the target, and now I can click on the roof, and it should jump it up there. And then click done. You can, of course, also drag the light in this view here too. So I have this blue pin here. I can drag this around. So you can see if you want that highlight across that top face, I can drag it to the left. This can be a really fussy process, and I think some students get frustrated with this. Now that I have that highlight there, I'm just not going to touch it. I'm going to leave it. For what it's worth, you can always change it to a rectangle. So here, this is a circle. If I click the rectangle tool here, you can see it change that. If you drop down the size, you can change the X and Y independent of each other. So here's a way that I can now change this highlight by just changing the width of this rectangle. So now I can get this gloss line to fall exactly where I want it. You can also, I believe you can rotate it, which I believe will also rotate this angle for me across the top. So if I'm trying to get this angle to be really sharp all the way across, I can change this and just kind of drag it in different directions and see what happens to try and get that gloss across the top there. Again, it can totally be fussy. Again, more often than not, what I do is I do a combination of both of these things. So for example, I have this set up like, this is again why you can toggle back and forth. I might go to this first environment with this editor here, and maybe I think this face looks a little bit dark. Under HDRI editor, I'll just click a pin light, and maybe I'll just click on this face here, just so I can lighten that up. Or maybe I want more highlights across on these large radii. So maybe I'll click on this here and get that to be a highlight to pop there. Does that make sense? Or maybe click a bit forward. The last thing that I want to talk about, under scene here, there's a couple things you can do. So there is, and now of course I'm forgetting where this is, Add Studio. Oh, did this not? I apologize that this is mirrored down here. I think I printed the wrong file, so sorry about that. It's the very back page, bottom left is mirrored. Let's see, window, yeah, here you go, Studio, it's the U button. This is a little bit more advanced. If you're working in like a deep file and you have like lots of different configurations, door open, door closed, a bathroom scene, a custom lighting scene, this is where studios are useful. So you can always create a new studio from like your current settings. And here you can see in the studio, what do you want? Do you want your camera to use camera 1, 2, or 3? This loads all the different things that you have created, and you can have it populate that way. So studios is simply a way of organizing. I'll be honest, I don't really use them. What I do use are model and scene sets, and that's this right here. So for example, this would be an instance where, let's say I want a door open, door closed, or burners on, burner off. If I have my scene set here with my door closed, I might click on this to create a new model set. I could just name it open and click OK. And what it does is it'll also create 2 renders, so it'll show what's going on here. If in this model, so in my open model set here, if I click on the door, whoops, it's not highlighting it for me. Come on now. Yeah, typically when you click on something out here, it'll highlight it and help you find it. If for some reason it's not, this is where the names are useful. So I can like try hiding these things and see if I can find, here we go, it's glass, it's labeled. So I can hide this door. I don't have 2 handles in here, I only have 1. So I'm gonna hide this one. I organized this earlier, so here is my, glass, hide this. Because I organized this earlier, okay, made a mistake. When I created this new scene set, I did not copy the door over. So if I go back to my default here, you'll see there's the door. What I needed to do before I created the scene set is turn this on and then say new scene set and say open, in this case open 2. And now in my new scene set here, this is where I can then go in, hide what I need to hide. So hide the door, hide the handle. And this would be the way to toggle between an open view and a closed view. It kind of, again, it remembers, oops. In my default here, it will remember whatever your last setting is. So, okay, so here, door's open, uncheck this box to hide it, check this box to show this door closed. This is just a way to show like how you might show different configurations. I believe this is the other way you might play with materials. Again, it's not really part of this project, but I believe that depends what settings you chose. I think the default is that it will not link materials. So that this way, if you need to render different CMF, this would be my suggested workflow for you all, is to use these model sets. So the best way to, if you want to have an open and closed view, again, it's not a requirement. It would be better to bring it in from SolidWorks with the handle mounted on the door with it open. If you kind of find yourself in this situation, what I would probably do is take this handle. And this is again why scene sets are good, because now I can mess with this handle and it doesn't matter. If I select the handle, you can move things in keyshot, it's just not as clean. So I can click on the handle here. You can go to position. So for example, and like you can play with these. I'm not quite sure which one it is. I'm going to guess it's the x-axis. Let's change this to 0 and see what happens. Nope. So you can always set it back to 90. Actually, it is probably this one right here. Set this to 0. Yep. Set this to 90. Let's see if negatives work. I think they do. Negative 90. There you go. And now what you could do is you can right click on this and you can say move selection. It will bring this up. You can drag this down to where it looks like it's about right, and then drag it forward. So it is possible to do it in keyshot. It's just a bit clunky. But if you're in a pinch and you forgot to do it, it works. So now with my open view and my default view, you can see the handle stays in the same place. Here it moved down. So again, I strongly recommend model sets. I think studios are a little bit too fussy. I think model sets are definitely handy for product development because it's like you might want to show two orientations or different CMF. For what it's worth, I believe the model sets will also remember on and off. So this might be an in-use scenario. The burners are on. Maybe in this one, if I hide my door and double click on this, again, I have my multi-material set up, or I did. I guess I didn't save it. I can duplicate this. And in this one, I can simply change this from emissive to just like flat. Or no, actually flat's not a good one, sorry. Plastic. And that will make it look like it's off. And so now that's just a simple way to toggle between off and like in use and on.